ask me a question.
Okay. So what we're interested in is how has Rosemary Radford Ruther's life and academic scholarship influenced you?
I think it was my guess is 1983. It was her first class that she was going to teach somewhere, women's studies, and it was in Canada, in Toronto. And I got a brochure in Tucson. I was living in Tucson, Arizona, for this possibility, and we decided that that was the thing to do, and I went. And some women in Canada were teaching about Canadian women and how they survived the winters, and Ruther was telling me about the Malleus Maleficarum, which was a little bit of a shock. And we had been reading Mary Daly's book, and she gave me her ideas about the certain amount of need to improve the history in that book. So I thought, ooh, this is a woman with a real critical, objective, practical, dedicated psyche, and I like her.
How do you use Rosemary's work in her academic scholarship and your activist work?
Well, I haven't thought about it this way, but what comes into my mind is that I wish that I could really express her incredible objectivity and openness to ideas and to learning in general. And also, I really admire her strictness about history, that you're accurate, always as accurate as possible. You don't fool around with history. I think I didn't have that respect until that class with Ruther.
In terms of ritual, how does that integrate into your activist work?
Well, I went home to Tucson, Arizona and taught high school boys and girls. That was very activist. Some of the things I learned from her. It isn't easy to translate the Malleus Maleficarum for high school students. But if anybody could do it, Ruther could do it. She's really a great teacher, and like a generous heart, and to the point, always to the point. But so accepting of everybody around her. Model how to be a teacher.
You said Gaia and God was an important book to you. Can you say why?
Mark and I are really trying to sort of memorize it. Well, it's a wonderful, accessible work that sums up how Ruther is absolutely up to date talking about Gaia. There's nothing else that anybody with scholarship is talking about except Gaia. And she's doing a very good job of talking about Gaia with facts and information and theories and clarity. Oh my gosh. I wish I were better prepared to synopsize how impressive she is in her thinking. She is so available to learn from.
So would you say that's her major contribution to ecofeminism?
Well, it's one of her major contributions, that's for sure. I think a really major one was that she, from the beginning in Mexico, she supported the women of South America to do what they wanted to do, in forming some kind of collective that would enable them to have work in South America and not have to come to North America to women's conferences and so forth. But they had so many responsive women in every country, in Central America, South America. And they made a major contribution to women's work and history, in my opinion.
Well, now you're doing work too in Chile. How do you integrate Gaia and God into that work?
Okay, well, we fell in love with Chile, so any excuse to get back as often as we can, including teaching or anything else. So the last time we went, my husband and I went, and we had the privilege of working with women that Judy Ress had gathered together, Judy and others, of course. I was thinking about I can't think of her name. It's from Brazil.
Yvonne.
No, like Gaga or Zaga or
Aga.
Aga's friend.
Yes.
Aga.
Yes.
Aga. Yeah, there were women that I'd met over the years going down to work there, and then they come back, and they've worked with the ideas about women and the school, all the ideas that the school promoted. It's such a beautiful thing to see this in women, and they're, I want to say, clear, humble, immediate responsiveness to people's needs in general.
I guess
Beautiful.
the last thing I'll ask you is about the your reflections on myth and Tiamat.
Well, you know, at the end of the school, the end of the several years of the school operating, we sort of accidentally almost discovered that we hadn't done anything with the Enuma Elish, this ancient Babylonian myth, and that it was so accessible to understanding so much in Western theology and Western biblical history, and it was exciting, but it was just barely discovered at the end. And then after we finished, we began to read the work of the two Jungian analysts in England, whose name is escaping me at the moment, whose names are escaping me, but they wrote a wonderful book that covered all of the discoveries of women's history and allowed us to see a Jungian perspective and to focus on the Enuma Elish as the myth that talks about creation, that competes with Genesis for some kind of understanding of that part of the world and the creation myths that came out of that part of the world. And it's much less known than the Genesis, and needs to be known and needs to be studied. The Enuma Elish. It's a big discovery.
Is there anything else you want to say? For younger scholars?
Well, what comes into my mind, I can think of a lot of things I'd like to say, actually, but what comes very prominently is Rosemary's deep respect for history being accurate and being not inflated or in any way, you know, from the perspective that was prejudiced. Just incredible objectivity and scrupulosity almost about being academically and scholastically accurate, and she didn't ever strike me as excessive in this demand. She just appreciated it, and her acknowledgement of it in others was wonderful. It's hard. I wish, Judy, maybe you could help me. I wish it's hard to express a kind of genius that she's got, because on the one hand, she's an incredible scholar, mind-blowing scholar. She absolutely never puts on airs around that or lards things with this scholarship, and instead she kind of goes to wherever the truth is or wherever the interesting ideas are, and then she makes it even more interesting. And whatever it is, it gets you. She traps you into scholastic work if you listen to her at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not manipulative, it's just who she is. Thank God for her. Thank Goddess.